Madam President. Sorry. Oh, that's a pleasure. I wouldn't make the speech go twice as long. Can I just thank you for the time, Madam President, you've put into this chamber over the last 4 years, and I think it's been well appreciated. But I was listening to the Governor's speech the other day and touching on everything, and the one thing that made me prick up my ears was that was to do with Whitnam Gorge. Now, Whitnam Gorge has been going on for years, and in fact it was just about finished as a bill. And, I went back and found the Closure Bill 2018 explanatory memorandum, and we'd gone right through. We'd got to the valuations of the buildings, etc. And now we start all over again. The cost to the Shire, the Ashburton Shire, with this is huge. And of course the insurance policy ran out years ago. So now they rely on the value was input by the Shire and also by other mining companies that contribute. It wouldn't survive otherwise. So that was one. Then, for a better one, of course, I heard that the patient-assisted travel scheme was going to support $100 per night, which I think would be very much welcomed in that area, or virtually all of Western Australia comes under the PAT scheme. And I have to say, it is a marvellous scheme to kind of bring down the costs of medicine and health. It's been a great honour to serve in the mining and pastoral region, and for the last 16 years, I have to say the time really flew. I didn't really realise I'd been there for 16 years until this coming up. And everyone says, "Why did you leave?" And I said, "Well, I thought it was my time to leave, but there's others that followed me as well. I didn't plan on that." Of course, the area of the mining and pastoral, where most of you know, covers some 80% of the state of Western Australia, and on top of that, of course, it also produces some 40% of the nation's income. And that would still be a figure today. I know when John Howard used to come and visit over here, they used to say, 40% of the, is your income. "Oh, I don't want to hear about it, don't want to hear about it," and off he went. Of course, they drew on it pretty heavily because that was before goods and services tax were given out in a more freedom way. Of course, not a lot's changed, but the communities have, and there's still a lot of work to do under those things, and I will touch on those in my speech shortly. There are, of course, opportunities across this part of Western Australia, and can harvest them in a way that drives investment in infrastructure, training, building capacity into our regions. We can go a long way to addressing the high levels of unemployment and over-reliance of the government services. Creating more vibrant and sustainable economies and communities throughout the mining and pastoral region is still very much work in progress. A major piece of infrastructure that I have discussed in this place many times is the Tanami Road. But I'll bring out a bit more of that later. I'll touch it again later, but cannot stress how important it is to the sustainable development of northern Western Australia. Its sealing will significantly reduce the distance to the eastern states. It's about 1,000 kilometres difference if you have that road sealed. The problems with that road is that it does get dished out millions, but of course they just get the road up to a certain standard where you can actually seal it, and then along comes the wet season. You only need 1 or 2 trucks, and that's the end of that beautiful piece of dirt road. So sealing is the only way to go for the future. Sealing will significantly reduce the distance to the eastern states as well, and importantly significantly reduce the cost of servicing many of the very remote Aboriginal communities in East Kimberley. There are a number of other important road projects that require completion. So will greatly improve access to health services, general freight and encourage economic growth in Western Australia. The Wiluna-Meekatharra Road is one that's kind of pops its head up every year, and the money gets put on it, and you have a change of government and the money goes elsewhere and it comes back again in the next one. So when we get to the next one, it should be back again. The Cape Leveque Road, though, is an example. It's a 160-kilometre stretch of road linked communities along the Dampier Peninsula, with Broome as the regional centre. Is already driving investment and economic development in remote Aboriginal communities. Importantly, it is delivering a new sense of hope and ambition to harness opportunities that exist in tourism and the resource sector. Another issue that's been brewing up there for a while in the north is the Broome boating facility. On a positive note, I wanted to discuss the Broome boating facility proposal, which is yet to receive full funding, but I sincerely hopes this becomes a reality. I think it was, we'll put up half if you put up half for the future. I wanted to take a minute to emphasise what an incredible community collaboration has taken place in order for this proposal to reach such an advanced stage. A bit of background, Broome has one of the highest levels of boat ownership in Western Australia, with approximately 60% of households owning a boat. One boat ramp alone experiences 25% of the boat launching traffic centred at Hillary's Boat Harbour, which is pretty significant for a town with a permanent population of around 16,000. The issues of a safe boat launching ramp has been fraught issue for at least 2 decades. Over 20 different locations and concepts have been explored and abandoned for numerous reasons, including costs, inability to build broad consensus, ongoing maintenance such as dredging and environmental issues and heritage issues. Finally, after 3 years of hard work overseen by the Shire of Broome and Department of Transport, a plan has been released. The concept and location has been endorsed by the Nyambu, Buru, Yarru, Broome Fishing Club, Kimberley Ports, and has received quantitative support from the Dinosaur Coast Management Group. The plan was released in March 2020 and put to public comment. It received the most responses ever to a Shire of Broome survey, 1,221 responses, with 74% of the resources either supportive or highly supportive. Feedback was received regarding the proposal as a result of changes have been made to ensure rock cliffs remain untouched. The known dinosaur footprints will remain in place and accessible thanks to from very dedicated people involved in the Dinosaur Coast Management Group. Now then, one I want to touch on, and that's antisocial behaviour, liquor licensing and police. I'd like to acknowledge Robin Scott's impassioned speech last year, and growing anger and frustration in successive governments' inability to deal with some very serious issues in northern WA. Liquor licensing in the Kimberley is a patchwork of restrictions that vary from location to location, encouraging hardcore drinkers to move to wherever access to alcohol is easiest. A major centre like Broome struggles to cope with the people who do not have homes in Broome, do not want to use the alcohol-free short-stay accommodation facility. This was built to support Aboriginal people who need to travel to regional centres for various reasons. Result in an overcrowded housing and public areas close to liquor outlets become temporary camps where rubbish, hygiene and violent incidents are major concerns. The Shire of Broome was spent some $70,000 building a fence around the visitor centre to protect the staff and visitors from antisocial behaviour and property damage. Cutting the supply of grog has had some benefits, but the people who desperately require support and rehabilitation move away from their homes and support in order to keep drinking. A lot has to change. These problems are not easy to overcome, but there is an overwhelming feeling in the community that those in authority and with the power to make changes are doing too little to curb this behaviour. A whole-of-government approach still has not been achieved in dealing with these issues. The patchwork of liquor restrictions just moves problems from one regional centre to another and restricts the vast majority of the community who drink responsibly. I would be interested to see just how many metropolitan areas in Perth would react if you were to tell people they could only buy 3 bottles of wine or 1 carton of beer in one transaction. The absurdity of these regulations was highlighted in questions without notice. The government has acknowledged that residents in the Kimberley are not allowed to buy alcohol in bulk for a special occasion from local retailers who are willing and able to work with local police, but they can jump on the internet, order as much as they like from Perth retailer and have it delivered within days to their local post office for $18. My office received a phone call from a person based in the Kimberley town who is unable to purchase anything other than light beer within 300 kilometres of where they live. However, at the house next door, they see carton after carton the beer being carried out the door on a daily basis. It's very likely to come across the Northern Territory border or online. A question asked on the 4th of November 2020 also confirmed that the government has no idea how much packaged alcohol is sent from metro retailers to the Kimberley or Pilbara. It is an incredible double standard. Retailers in the Kimberley regularly have to hand over months of transactions, CCTV footage, and face penalties for allowing couples to purchase their daily amount and processing the sale as one transaction. It's completely ridiculous. At the end of the day, the problems are still there. The announcement that a banned drinkers register will be trialled in the Pilbara and Kimberley has been cautiously welcomed. However, I can't emphasise enough that the register needs to be highly dynamic, with open lines of communication between police and liquor outlets. A banned drinkers register with no name on it was very costly and ultimately futile exercise. This situation has emerged in Kununurra, which is very frustrating for all involved, police and retailers alike. 800 new police for Western Australia will come as a welcome news to many in WA. However, you've got to remember that 800 police is over 4 years. Now, the very challenging issue of juvenile crime. I spoke at length about the issue over a year ago in this place, and I'm concerned that most people would say that little has changed. It is clear the police and regional centres, such as Broome, are under incredible pressure. The juvenile justice strategy. This year we have seen the issue of teenagers and sometimes younger children being involved in violent attacks on other people in their community, both in and out of school. There is a strong need for more appropriate juvenile detention options to be available in the north. Juveniles who reach the sentencing stage are flown to Perth for a short period, about 3 weeks, I'm told, and return to the community. We need a far better way of dealing with this matter. The regions need facilities closer to home. Places where serious juvenile offenders can be sent to receive intensive supervision and assessment of their needs, such as health, learning abilities and behavioural problems, while still being on the country and accessible to family rather than thousands of kilometres away in Perth. The answer to this requires far more than extra policing, and options other than short custodial sentences at Banksia or slap on the wrists are required. Banksia, by the way, handles 10 to 17-year-olds. If children exhibit seriously violent behaviour in school, there needs to be options available to remove those students from the mainstream community. Victims of these incidents deserve to feel safe going back to school. The perpetrators need to get the support required to address their problems while continuing their education, but with understanding that for a time they've lost their privilege of attending school. One of the first committees I sat on in this Parliament in 2006 was the Standing Committee on Legislation, and we were looking into the Parental Responsibility Support and Responsibility Bill 2005. One of the witnesses was a person with impeccable insight into many of the problems facing young Aboriginal people and with researched evidence-based strategies to address the very complex issue that exists in many communities today. Dr. Tracy Westerman was the name of the witness, and is someone who has grown in renown ever since, including being named a Person of the Year in 2018. Professor Tracy Westerman, as she is known now, has developed evidence-based best practice programs and service which aims to provide culturally competent mental health services for Aboriginal people. There are significant resources directly towards closing the gap and improving outcomes for Aboriginal people, but I believe many of us agree that it isn't always directed in a very effective way. Dr. Tracy Westerman, I have to say, had 85% of her work in the eastern states, and she should never have been allowed out of the state again. In fact, she could be put up with a ban, and I think the changes in the state would be impeccable. Transport. The road network throughout Western Australia requires improvement, and I know that most of it comes on the bigger roads from the feds, but it's still important for state to have their foot in the door. Commencing work on the Tanami to finally seal the WA section will be a huge boost to the East Kimberley when it has suffered tremendously from the economic slowdown attributed to the COVID-19. An influx of workers required to complete this work would be a huge boost and would create transport infrastructure that will provide ongoing benefits to the whole region. A sealed Tanami will support a number of resource projects which will further diversify the East Kimberley. One project in particular is the Agmin Mackay Potash project, located in the East Pilbara. The project is forecast to be the world's lowest cost producer of sulphate and potash, SOP, which is an important mineral used widely in agriculture to improve crop yield. The plan is for the finished product, which will be processed on site at Lake Mackay, to be shipped directly from the Wyndham port. Production capacity is designed to be 450,000 tonnes per annum of SOP over an initial 40-year mine life, approximately 250 kilometres of the Tanami Road being used. It will be used by Agrimin journey from Lake Mackay to Wyndham. Wyndham, of course, it always needs a bit of work because you dredge it one day and then you've got to come back and dredge it in a couple of days' time when you have a storm with such big high tides. Next, plan for our parks. The plan for our parks, which is continuing with 26 million allocated over the 4 years. However, there appears to be issues with the level of consultation occurring at a community level. The towns and communities that will be most affected by changes or expansion to national parks in the region deserve a seat at the table when deciding on these parks. Shark Bay residents in particular are feeling that they may lose access to areas they hold very dear and will have their town surrounded by national park, which will inhibit further growth in the town. Consultation is a paramount importance to ensure the right balance is struck when creating these parks, and I know they've got problems in the Kimberley as well. I'd just like to put in a little bit about electorate office work. I'm sure all of us would agree that some of the most satisfying moments in our parliamentary careers sometimes come from being able to directly improve a situation for a constituent. Sorting out a problem that have come to your office, which isn't always possible, but it's great when you can help restore at least one person's faith in politicians. One such constituent springs to mind for me, a lady from Derby, who was not afraid to get on the phone if she thought something wasn't quite right. This lady, Mrs. Archie, was her early 80s, but still drove her four-wheel drive 2,600 kilometres to Perth in her own once a year to do her Christmas shopping. But of course she needed a licence, and the licence had to be renewed, of course, is what I should be saying. And she required a medical. Now, the Derby Hospital wanted to charge Mrs. Archie $280 for a medical, and she was not having a bar of it. Her instincts were proven correct, and when after a few questions without notice in the WA Country Health Service, realised this service should be free for pensioners. The audit revealed up to 206 pensioners across the Kimberley had been incorrectly charged for this service, and up to $57,680 was likely to be refunded. They can seem like small wins in the scheme of things, but can make a big difference to people's lives, and is one of the best parts of being a Member of Parliament. Now I'd like to just touch on my time as a Minister. When I became the Minister, I was advised that most ministers fail to leave their mark on a portfolio and best can expect to have one major achievement a year. While only a portion of my time in the politics had been as a Minister, and much of the good work I felt I did, I was supported by electorate or sitting on a committee, I can say with confidence that my time as a Minister was the highlight, and I have no doubt I left my mark on the portfolio, driving more than 3 big issues in three years. Most notable would have to be rolling out the comprehensive wild dog strategy, including my bounty trial, I would add was a success, contrary to what anyone else would tell you. And then, of course, there was the shark cull trial. That didn't go down very well with the western suburbs. And then there was the deregulation with compensation for the Potato Marketing Corporation. That was the Act of 1946. Nobody was going to touch that. Eventually we got on side, and we actually had some funding put towards that to make it, give an incentive for it to happen. I also travelled and checking, especially live export of cattle and sheep, and travelled over the world. Of course, you probably wouldn't do that today as gamely as we were able to do it then. But it was a very important part of gaining confidence in the export market, or continuing that market. And the biggest of them all, of course, was the GM Crop Restrictions Act, which was repealed. And that took about nearly 3 years to do. One thought it could be done fairly simply, but it took a long time. As a Minister in the Barnett government, I'm very proud of my achievement, have responsibility for both agriculture, and when we did still have separate departments of agriculture and fisheries. And I still believe that's the way to go for the future when you build that new building, Minister. And one of my first jobs as a Minister was to address the water issues in Carnarvon. At the time, the river had not run for 2 long summers, and things were looking grim for the irrigators in the Gascoyne. But I'll just tell you a little story that I'll divert. There was a minister called Ian Lawrence, who was the Minister for Lands, I think, in the Gascoyne area years ago. And once again, they were in drought, and the honourable member at the time decided it was desperate and we needed to have a church meeting to pray to get the river to flow. Well, that did happen. It was positive. The river flowed, the town flooded. He wasn't as popular as he was, and they'd seen the first stream. So it's two-pronged. You ought to always watch out. As a former resident and Shire councillor, I had a passion for this unique town. That offers so much, and addressing the water issues was always going to be one of my priorities. We appointed a Carnarvon Ministerial Advisory Committee. The work that we did ultimately led to the large investment in water. The drilling of 30 new bores and putting power along the river has gone a long way to improving water security in the Gascoyne Horticulture Precinct. We also instigated an independent review and investment on the administration of animal welfare. This started a long overdue process of improving the delivery of animal welfare in the state. While Royalties for Regions was the big ticket funder or project in agriculture during my time, I focused on driving practical outcomes that would bring more dollars through the farm gate for farmers. Irrigated agriculture is not just in Carnarvon, of course, but is also in the Pilbara. I was around the table when the decision was made to invest some $12.5 million into the Pilbara Hinterland Development Initiative, which trialled mine dewatering that projects at Woody Woody. This was an important way to address both mine dewatering and drought-proofing the north. We also did a lot of work proving up the water resources in the West Kimberley. putting down 12 bores at Roebuck Plains with the Department of Ag doing all the soil and farm planning. The only problem is that as fast as we proved we could develop new irrigations district, other groups would mobilise to stop us, which is very little has happened in the Kimberley to utilise the massive water assets in the north. If I had my time again, I'd like to have the role of the Minister of Environment at the same time as the Minister for Development. But I know I'm not going to get here. And of course, what I was talking about was the hyper-risk sensitive department approach to things like Rhodes grass, which was endemic in the Kimberley. Sometimes department and government can not see the wealth from the weeds. Bravo apple, and that hit the news this morning, and the Bravo apple finally appeared after 20 years of development. And one thing I did was to make sure the department did not stuff up the royalty rights like we lost part of them for the Pink Lady. It was a challenging journey, but I'm pleased to see industry leaders like Dr. Ben Derbyshire stayed the course and ensured the end structure. It generated food income for Fruit West and industry development funds that oversee the apple. I actually thought the apple should have been called the Wicked Apple, and we probably would have sold a lot more. But it took years to get it on the market. While some work had happened under Terry Redmond and wild dogs, I can't say it was probably my number of priority, and I pushed up for the $75,000 trial bounty of $100 a scalp, which I mentioned earlier. And what it actually did is it took $75,000. I think 20 got consumed in bureaucracy, and the rest of it went out on scalps. And the scalps rose. The department fellow came and said, "Look, it's failed." I said, "Why has it failed?" "Oh, we've got more dogs." I said, "Why was that rejected?" "Oh, getting more dogs." I said, "We didn't fail, because we did get more dogs. And the people that were getting them, though, were the doggers, because you put a dollar sign on them and they went out and got them. That's not a bad contract." I recall the briefings from Viv Reid, who's from the department, and he couldn't believe it either, what had happened. We went on for total exclusion, of course, for the big ring fences of stations like Rawlinna out in the Nullarbor and Kalgoorlie and Gascoyne. Ultimately, we spent millions on doggers, fences and culling, including $10 million for 820 kilometres through the Shire of Yilgarn. It was this work that led to the extension of the Esperance fence, which is a big deal for the sheep industry in part of the world. The new BAM Act was rolled out under my watch in an act that replaced 16 older acts. A lot of work in this in opposition, and I was pleased to be there when the new act came into fruition. Kim Chance was chairing that and when he was pushing it along when I first came in here, and I followed it through. We followed it on committee, and we waited for regulations, and then went out of the committee, still waiting for regulations. It wasn't until I became minister we ended up with the regulations catching up with us. It was quite amazing. Good lesson in politics. Under the Act, recognised biosecurity groups were formed with matching funds from the state of government. These were an important instrument to help control feral animals like wild dogs. I undertook trips to China, etc., and of course, as I said, I wouldn't go back there now for a while. I'm also keen to support our live export trade, something which is incredibly important to sheep and cattle producers in the state. I battled Cabinet and Royalties for Region to get some $23 million for the new to get South Doodlakine and Marchagee Doppler radar stations, which has been a game changer for short-term forecasting in the southwest of the state. And I believe that this program was paid dividend recently with the tracking of cyclones that hit the northern and northern-eastern wheat belt. It gave farmers detailed knowledge of what was coming. Ultimately, I put a farmer review of the portfolio, and I believe that only a farmer can really understand how to get the best out of the department and not get us sidetracked into issues that are not relevant to the portfolio of priority for farmers. That applies to pastures as well, of course. So in summary, they were good years, and I'm proud of the fact that the fishers continue to fish, the farmers to farm, and the closing down fisheries or banning live export rather. I was pushed to open up to start up more agriculture and support more rural jobs. I'd like to just pay my respect to my wife, Robin, who had to put up with many late nights, kicking the cat off the bed and make room for me about 4 o'clock in the morning. But I was still welcome home. My sons, Derek, Richard and Thomas, they were also very patient and good supporters. I'd go to this place and we'd battle away at a bill all day, and then I'd go to one of my sons and say, what do you reckon? And they'd sum it up in about 5 minutes. I'd go back the next day with feeling totally relaxed and we were doing the right thing, whatever it was. But I will miss the place. It's kind of getting up in the morning and not putting a suit on will be quite a change. And I see the auntie farmer in here making comments, but can I say that I will drop in here from time to time. I see the old farmers and et cetera, that can come back here now and actually participate as having an office and using the gym and other facilities and the meals on the right days. So thank you, and I really appreciate the support that I've had over the years, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you.
The Honourable Ken Baston, I'd also like to offer my thanks for your service to this chamber, and it's been a pleasure to work with you, and I wish you well for your new chapter with your return to your family. So members, we are currently dealing with the address and reply, and the question is that the motion be agreed.